My daughter-in-law gave me a cruise as a gift right there, during an elegant dinner, while she deliberately kept my son busy on the dance floor. While they were gone, a waitress slipped me a note. It read, "I just saw her put something into your drink." I didn't panic. I calmly switched our glasses and waited. And sure enough, my daughter-in-law ended up drugging herself instead of me. About 20 minutes later, she was slurring and babbling nonsense while my son stared at her in absolute shock, asking if she needed a doctor. That was the moment it hit me. I had been living with a predator for months, and she'd been slowly poisoning my mind, one sip at a time. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because this story gets far darker than you expect. And I promise you've never heard anything like it before. But let me rewind and explain how I ended up at that dinner, because looking back, I should have seen the danger from the very beginning. The warning signs were everywhere, bright red flags that I somehow mistook for welcome mats. It all started on a Tuesday evening when my son, Elliot, called me. His voice had a spark I hadn't heard in years. "Mom, I want you to meet someone special. Are you free for dinner this weekend?" My heart skipped, not because of romance. I'd long given up on that after losing Richard. It skipped because it had been years since Elliot sounded truly happy. Success had changed him. His tech company swallowed his life with 18-hour workdays. Our weekly dinners faded into monthly phone calls, then awkward holiday visits with stiff hugs. Saturday night came, and I spent far too long deciding what to wear. Nothing too fancy. Didn't want to look like I was trying too hard, but nice enough to make a good impression. The restaurant was one of those upscale downtown places, with white tablecloths and waiters who whispered. When Elliot walked in, holding hands with a stunning blonde woman, I immediately understood why he'd been so distracted lately. She was the kind of beautiful that made other women discreetly check their lipstick. Tall, elegant, with flawless hair that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. "Mom, this is Ava," Elliot said, his face glowing in a way I hadn't seen since he was 12 and got his first bicycle. "Mrs. Bennett, I've heard so much about you," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. Her smile looked warm and genuine, and her handshake was confident without being aggressive. "Elliot talks about you all the time. He's told me about your charity work and how you practically built half the children's section of the library." Really, because these days he barely called, but I smiled and went along with it. Throughout dinner, Ava treated every word I said like it was priceless wisdom. She admired my vintage Chanel earrings. "They're absolutely timeless. Where did you find them?" She asked thoughtful questions about Richard's engineering career and wanted to know about my volunteer work at the animal shelter. When I mentioned how quiet the house felt after Richard passed, how I sometimes went days without real conversation, reacted with visible concern. "Oh, Rosemay, I call you Rose. You shouldn't be alone like that. That's heartbreaking." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her touch warm and comforting. Then she turned to Elliot. "Didn't you mention the cruise we booked for next month? The Caribbean one?" Elliot froze, his fork suspended midair. "Well, yes, but I thought we agreed it would just be the two of us." "Oh no," Ava said brightly. "Rose should come with us." Her excitement seemed genuine, almost overflowing. "It'll be perfect, the three of us, bonding. I'd love to spend time with my future mother." "Please say yes, Rose. It would mean so much to me." Future mother-in-law. Those words landed right in the hollow space. Inside me, the place that had been aching since Richard died. Someone wanted me included. Someone was imagining a future where I belonged. I said yes before Elliot could object. Honestly, I would have agreed to a trip to Antarctica if it meant feeling wanted again. Over the next few weeks, Ava and I became inseparable. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had a daughter. We went shopping, and she actually asked my opinion on clothes. We had coffee dates where she listened patiently as I talked about Richard's awful jokes and his obsession with fixing things that weren't broken. We shared long lunches where she encouraged dessert and told stories about her teaching job that made me laugh until my cheeks hurt. She seemed perfect, attentive without smothering, sweet without being fake, interested in my life without making it feel like an interrogation, or so I believed. God, I was such a fool. One afternoon, while shopping at that upscale mall across town, she became oddly fascinated with my house. We stopped there so I could grab my good credit card, and she wandered through the rooms slowly, her expression dreamy, almost reverent, as if she were memorizing every detail. Her fingers glided slowly across the marble countertops in the kitchen. She paused for a full minute beneath the crystal chandelier Richard had surprised me with for our 20th anniversary. staring up at it in quiet admiration. Then she spent far too long standing on the master bedroom balcony, gazing out at the view as if she were trying to memorize it. Rose, this place looks like it came straight out of a magazine, she said with a soft sigh. She settled into Richard's old leather chair in the study, easing into it like she was testing how it felt to belong there. I bet you wake up every morning feeling like absolute royalty. The light, the space, the way everything flows together, it's perfect. It's just a house, dear, I said, though I couldn't deny that her admiration felt good. Richard and I were very lucky, but it's really too big for just me now. She shook her head firmly, her eyes still roaming over the room, as if she were committing every detail to memory. No, it's not just a house. This is a dream home. Someone could live here forever and never want to leave, never need to leave. The way she emphasized those last words, never need to leave, sent a strange chill through me, but I brushed it off, assuming it was simply excitement. Maybe she was picturing her future with Elliot, imagining the kind of life they might build together one day. That same afternoon, I made what I now understand was a critical mistake. While we were at the department store, I ducked into the restroom and left my purse with her for a few minutes. She was trying on a scarf, chatting easily with the sales associate about how silk scarves never go out of style, and it felt perfectly natural to ask her to watch my things. When I returned, nothing seemed disturbed. My wallet was exactly where I'd left it. My keys were still clipped inside the pocket. Ava stood right where I'd left her too, now trying on a pair of sunglasses that made her look like a movie star. But looking back now, knowing what I know, that was probably the moment it all began. That was when she had access to my purse, my pill organizer, my entire life, neatly packed into one leather bag, ready to grab lunch. She asked cheerfully, linking her arm through mine, as if we were longtime friends. I should have been more careful. I should have noticed how she seemed to know where everything was in my house after just one visit. I should have questioned how someone living on a teacher's salary could afford designer clothes and expensive dinners. But I was lonely, desperately so. I was starving for companionship, aching to feel needed and wanted again, and because of that, I ignored every instinct telling me to be cautious. What I didn't realize was that my peaceful retirement was about to turn into a living nightmare, and the woman I was beginning to love like the daughter I never had was already planning to destroy me from the inside out, one carefully measured dose at a time. The confusion started about a week before the cruise. At first, I convinced myself it was stress, maybe excitement about the trip, maybe the natural anxiety that comes with aging, with the quiet fear that your mind isn't as sharp as it once was. It began with small things I tried to laugh off. One Tuesday morning, I woke up in my guest bathroom, standing in front of the mirror in my nightgown, completely disoriented. For several terrifying minutes, I couldn't remember whether I was at home or in a hotel room. The marble tiles beneath my bare feet felt unfamiliar. The face staring back at me looked like a stranger. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Get it together, Rose," I whispered, gripping the marble countertop until my knuckles turned white. "You're in your own house. This is your bathroom. You've lived here for 32 years. Even then, the confusion lingered like fog, making everything feel distant, unreal, and disconnected. Later that same day, I ran into my neighbor Janet at the grocery store. Janet, whom I'd known since the Carter administration. Janet, who had brought casseroles after Richard's funeral and still borrowed my hedge trimmer every spring. She stood directly in front of me in the produce aisle, holding a bag of oranges and smiling warmly. "Rose, how are you holding up, honey?" I looked at her face, so familiar. Yet suddenly, without a name, felt my mind scramble for information that should have come instantly. The silence stretched on, uncomfortable and heavy, as she waited for me to answer, her smile slowly fading into concern. I'm sorry," I finally said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to my own ears. "I'm just having one of those days. You know how it is. Are you feeling all right?" Janet's voice took on that careful tone people use when they're worried but trying not to show it. "You look a little pale." "Just tired. I am," I lied, because what else could I say? That I was losing my mind that I couldn't remember the name of someone I'd known for decades. When I told Elliot about these episodes during our next phone call, I tried to keep my tone light and casual, as if they were quirky little moments, instead of terrifying flashes of what felt like early dementia. "It's probably just stress, Mom," he said, but his voice sounded distant, distracted by whatever was on his computer screen. "Or maybe you just need a vacation. Good thing you're coming on the cruise with us. Sea air, relaxation, no responsibilities. It'll be perfect. Before I could reply, I heard Ava's voice in the background. A moment later, she was on the phone, her tone warm and reassuring. Rose, sweetie, don't worry about those little memory hiccups. My uncle went through something similar when he hit his 70s. Just age catching up with him, she said smoothly. You know, the ocean air will do you wonders. Sometimes we just need to get away from our routines and let our minds reset. Her uncle. She mentioned him so casually, like it was just ordinary family history. But something about the way she said it unsettled me, though I couldn't explain why. What happened to your uncle? I asked, curiosity slipping out before I could stop myself. There was a brief pause before she answered. Oh, he's doing much better now. He's in a lovely care facility, where he gets all the help he needs. Very peaceful, very serene. He seems quite content there. The incidents didn't stop. They kept happening, more often each time. I'd find myself standing in my kitchen with no memory of how I got there, holding a coffee mug and wondering if I'd intended to make tea instead. I'd start telling stories to my reflection in the bathroom mirror and forget how they ended halfway through. Once, I got lost driving to the bunker route I'd taken hundreds of times over the years, suddenly as unfamiliar as if I'd been dropped into a completely different city. But here's the truly twisted part. Every time something happened, every frightening episode, Ava would appear within hours. She'd show up with homemade soup or freshly baked cookies, settling into my kitchen as if she belonged there, overflowing with sympathy and concern. You poor thing, she'd say, carefully stirring honey into my tea. These things happen to all of us eventually. The important thing is not to stress about it. Stress only makes everything worse. I believed she was taking care of me, that she was being the devoted future daughter-in-law who genuinely cared about my well-being. The truth was, she was simply checking her work, monitoring her handiwork, to make sure the poison was doing exactly what she intended. The cruise ship was absolutely magnificent. When we boarded in Miami, gleaming glass elevators, polished marble floors, it felt like a floating palace designed to make you forget. You were surrounded by thousands of miles of open ocean. The lobby featured a 3-story waterfall and enough fresh flowers to supply a wedding. And for the first time in months, I felt a flutter of real excitement. Ava squealed with delight at everything, bouncing on her toes like a child at Disney World. Rose, look at this place. It's like something out of a movie. She grabbed my arm, practically vibrating with enthusiasm. We're going to have the most amazing time. I can already feel myself relaxing. Elliot, however, seemed strangely subdued as we went through check-in. While Ava chatted animatedly with the staff about dinner reservations and showed, he stood slightly apart, scrolling through his phone, his frown deepening with each message. Everything okay, honey? I asked, gently, touching his arm. He looked up, startled, as if he'd forgotten we were there. Oh yeah, just work stuff. The Johnson merger is hitting some snags, and my partners are... He stopped himself, shaking his head and slipping the phone into his pocket. It's fine. I'm supposed to be on vacation, right? That's right, Ava said firmly, appearing at his side with our room keys. No work, no stress, no thinking about anything except having fun together. She handed me my keycard with a bright smile. Rose, you're just down the hall from us, so we'll practically be neighbors. That first night, we met for dinner in the main dining room, a space so elegant it made me feel underdressed. Even though I was wearing my very best cocktail dress, the waiters moved through the dining room like dancers. Crystal glasses caught the light like tiny prisms, and the menu was filled with dishes I could barely pronounce. Elliot made a visible effort to stay present, asking about my plans for the next day and complimenting Ava's dress. Still, there was something tight in his smile, attention around his eyes that reminded me of how he used to look as a teenager when he was hiding a bad report card. You seem tired, sweetheart, I said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. Are you sure you're feeling all right? I just need time to adjust to being away from the office, he replied, but his laugh sounded forced. It's harder than I thought to completely disconnect. After dinner, we walked along the ship's promenade deck, admiring the way the moon painted a silver path across the dark water. Ava linked her arm through both of ours, chatting nonstop about everything she wanted to try: the rock climbing wall, cooking classes, dance lessons. This is perfect, she sighed contentedly. Just the three of us, no distractions, no interruptions. We can really get to know each other. Yet, as we headed back to our cabins, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Maybe it was the way Elliot kept checking his phone, even though we were in the middle of the ocean with spotty service. Maybe it was how Ava seemed almost too enthusiastic, as if she were performing happiness rather than actually feeling it. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard voices coming from their cabin next door. The walls were thinner than I expected, and their conversation carried clearly through the ventilation system. Elliot's voice was low and agitated. "I never discussed this timeline with you, Ava. This wasn't part of the plan." Her voice came back sharper, more insistent. "Plans change, Elliot. We don't have a choice now. The opportunity is right here. This is going too far. I'm not comfortable with. Since when do you get uncomfortable about anything that benefits us both?" After that, their voices dropped to whispers, but the tension was unmistakable. I pressed my ear to the wall, my heart pounding, trying to catch more words. All I could hear were urgent murmurs and the faint sound of papers being shuffled. The next morning, they acted as though nothing had happened, smiling, cheerful, the picture of a perfect couple, planning a perfect future. Ava brought me coffee in bed. "I thought you might want to start the day slowly," she said sweetly. Elliot seemed more relaxed too, asking about my plans and suggesting we all meet for lunch. But I couldn't forget what I'd overheard. I couldn't stop wondering what plan they'd been talking about, or why Elliot had sounded so uneasy about some kind of timeline. Little did I know, I was about to find out just how wrong my instincts were, and how much danger I was actually in by the third day. My episodes of confusion had grown noticeably worse, and I was genuinely starting to panic. These weren't occasional lapses anymore. They were frequent, frightening, and completely unpredictable. I woke up at 3 in the morning standing on the ship's deck, dressed in my pajamas, gripping the railing with no memory of leaving my cabin. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction, black and mysterious beneath a sky filled with stars. For several terrifying minutes, I couldn't remember my own name, let alone how I'd gotten there. A security guard found me about 20 minutes later, still standing there in my nightgown and slippers, shivering in the cool night air. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked gently, using the careful tone people reserve for confused elderly passengers they're afraid might hurt themselves. "I'm fine," I said automatically, even though nothing about this was fine. "Just getting some air. It's pretty cold out here for pajamas," he said diplomatically. "May I escort you back to your cabin?" The walk back was humiliating. Other passengers we passed stared at me with that painful mix of pity and discomfort people wear when they're watching someone else's dignity unravel in real time. I kept my head high, but inside, I was falling apart. At breakfast the next morning, Ava hovered over me like a concerned nurse monitoring a patient. "You look exhausted, Rose," she said softly as she slid into the chair across from me. "Did you sleep badly? Sometimes the motion of the ship can be disorienting." "I'm fine," I repeated, though my hands shook as I reached for my coffee. "Here," she said brightly, setting a tall glass in front of me. "I brought you some fresh orange juice, fresh squeezed from the buffet. And don't forget your morning medications. It's so important to stay on schedule, especially when our routines are disrupted." She was right, of course. I'd been taking the same medications for years. Blood pressure pills, calcium supplements, a mild antidepressant my doctor prescribed after Richard died. I'd been taking the same medications for years, yet lately they looked slightly different than I remembered. The shapes were just a bit off, the colors not quite what I expected. When I mentioned this to the ship's doctor during what Ava insisted was a routine wellness check, he barely hesitated before responding. "Generic brands often vary in appearance, Mrs. Bennett," he said calmly. "Pharmaceutical companies change manufacturing processes, different dyes, different coatings. As long as you're getting them from the same pharmacy, there's nothing to worry about." At the time, it sounded reasonable. Why would I question a medical professional? Around then, Ava also began carrying my purse during our daily outings around the ship. She said she wanted to help since I seemed a bit scattered lately. It felt thoughtful, kind. She took charge of my room key, my credit cards, even my lip balm, organizing everything with that efficient, capable air that made me feel cared for instead of diminished. "You just focus on enjoying yourself," she'd say warmly. "Let me handle the details." That afternoon, while she and Elliot were at the spa enjoying a couple's massage, I stayed behind in my cabin to rest. I lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to distant laughter drifting in from the pool deck, but my mind wouldn't quiet. Fragments of their whispered conversation replayed over and over. The timeline they'd argued about, the plan Ava said benefited them both, the way Elliot had sounded so uneasy, so resistant to whatever she was pushing for. And then there was her uncle, the way she'd casually mentioned his memory problems, how peaceful and content he supposedly was in his care facility. Something about that story felt rehearsed, like she'd told it many times before to many different people. I tried to dismiss the thoughts, tried to convince myself I was becoming paranoid because my own mental clarity was slipping, but the doubts kept returning, persistent and quiet. Like water seeping through cracks in a dam. Something was happening to me, something beyond normal aging, and I was starting to suspect it wasn't entirely natural. What I discovered next changed everything. I thought I knew about the people I trusted most. It was formal night on the ship, and the main dining room looked like something straight out of a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables dressed in pristine white linens, while a live orchestra played soft jazz that made every conversation feel intimate. Ava looked breathtaking in a gold sequined dress that clung to her like liquid metal, catching the light with every movement. The dress probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. And once again I found myself wondering how someone on a teacher's salary could afford something so extravagant. Then I reminded myself maybe Elliot had bought it for her. He'd always been generous with the people he loved. "You look beautiful tonight, dear," I told her as we were seated at our usual table near the dance floor. "Thank you, Rose. You look very elegant yourself in that navy dress," she replied, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand affectionately. "I'm so glad we're all here together. This trip has been absolutely perfect." Elliot seemed more relaxed than he had all week. He laughed at Ava's stories about her most challenging students and asked me about my plans to redecorate the guest bedroom once we got home. For the first time since boarding the ship, he felt present, engaged, no longer distracted by invisible worries. When the band began playing Moon River, one of Richard's favorite songs, Ava's face lit up. "I love this song," she said brightly. "Elliot, dance with me." She stood and extended her hand with a playful smile. "I'm not much of a dancer," he protested, though he was already pushing his chair back. "That's what makes it fun," she laughed, pulling him toward the polished dance floor, where other couples were already swaying to the music. I smiled as I watched them under the soft lights. Elliot was right, he wasn't much of a dancer, but Ava moved with effortless grace, guiding him through simple steps that made them look like they belonged together. Maybe I'd been wrong about everything. Maybe they were just stressed weeding plans, work pressure, and I'd mistaken ordinary couple tension for something darker. That was when the waitress appeared beside my table. She was young, maybe 25, with serious brown eyes and a concerned expression that immediately put me on edge. She opened a leather-bound menu in front of me with deliberate care and said just loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "Here's the special dessert menu you requested." "Ma'am, I hadn't requested any menu, special or otherwise." Confused, I looked down at the open page, expecting to see photographs of elaborate cakes and chocolate desserts. Instead, tucked between the pages was a folded cocktail napkin with my name written on it in hurried blue ink. My hands shook as I unfolded the napkin beneath the cover of the menu. I saw her put something in your drink when she got up to dance. Small white powder from a tiny bottle in her purse. "Don't react. Switch glasses when she comes back. Get help immediately." My blood turned to ice in my veins. I looked up at the waitress, who was still standing beside the table, her posture calm and professional, but her eyes told a different story, focused, urgent, and deeply worried. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the music. She gave the slightest nod and walked away, leaving me alone with the most terrifying realization of my life. I turned my gaze toward the dance floor. Ava was spinning gracefully in Elliot's arms, her sequined dress catching the light like scattered stars, her laughter floating above the music. She looked radiant, happy, perfectly innocent. Then I looked back at the table. Two crystal wine glasses sat side by side, mine half empty, hers barely touched. Identical glasses, filled with the same deep burgundy wine. Without allowing myself time to think, without hesitating long enough to second-guess what I was about to do, I switched them. When they returned to the table 5 minutes later, both slightly breathless and smiling, Ava was glowing. "That was wonderful," she said happily. "I haven't danced like that in years." She sat down and immediately reached for her wineglass, my wineglass, and lifted it in a toast. "To family," she said warmly, "and to the most perfect vacation I could have imagined." To family, Elliot echoed, raising his own glass. I lifted mine too, my hand steady even though my heart was pounding wildly against my ribs like a trapped bird. To family indeed, I said, and watched as she took a long, satisfied sip of the wine that I now knew had been meant to destroy me. 20 minutes later, I was watching my future daughter-in-law slowly poison herself with her own weapon, and the satisfaction was almost overwhelming at first. It was subtle. Ava began blinking more than usual, like she was struggling to keep her focus. She touched her forehead lightly and commented that the dining room felt warm, even though the air conditioning was perfectly comfortable. "Are you feeling all right, sweetheart?" Elliot asked, noticing the glassy look in her eyes. "I'm fine," she said, though her words came out just a fraction slower than normal. "Just, the wine is stronger than I expected." She'd barely finished half a glass, but I said nothing. 10 minutes later, her speech started to slur first, barely noticeable, then unmistakable. "The lights are so sparkly tonight," she giggled, staring up at the crystal chandelier with unfocused eyes, like little diamonds dancing in the air. "Have you ever noticed how diamonds dance, Rose?" Elliot frowned and set down his dessert fork. "Ava, are you sure you're okay? You've hardly had anything to drink." She tried to stand and swayed dangerously, grabbing the back of her chair to steady herself. "I feel floaty," she said dreamily, "like I'm on a cloud. Everything's moving, but in a good way." "Maybe you should sit down," I suggested gently, forcing myself to keep any satisfaction out of my voice. "The motion of the ship can be disorienting sometimes." She looked at me with pupils wide and unfocused, her beautiful face slack with confusion. "Rose," she murmured, "did you know the ocean has secrets? So many secrets swimming around down there in the dark." Other diners had begun to notice. People whispered behind their hands, casting uneasy glances toward our table. A young woman in an elegant designer gown was behaving completely intoxicated during a formal dinner, and it made everyone uncomfortable. "I have secrets too," Ava continued, her voice growing louder and more erratic. "Big secrets, important secrets, but they're safe with me, because I'm very good at keeping things safe." Elliot was genuinely alarmed now, his face flushed with both embarrassment and concern. "Okay, that's enough," he said firmly. "Come on, Ava, let's get you back to the room so you can lie down." "But I don't want to lie down," she protested, her words tumbling together. "I want to tell Rose about the secret. She should know about the secrets because they're her secrets too." Sort of. My heart nearly stopped. Even drugged and incoherent, was she about to confess what she'd been doing to me? "You're not making sense," Elliot said, standing and helping her to her feet. "Let's go." As he guided her toward the elevator, she kept rambling nonsense about floating castles and golden fish, about how beautiful it would be to live in a palace by the sea forever and ever. It was the same kind of confused, disconnected speech I'd been experiencing for weeks, the same terrifying loss of mental clarity that had made me question my own sanity. Except now, I knew the truth. This wasn't natural. It wasn't aging, stress, or early dementia. Someone had been systematically drugging me, and I had just watched them take a dose of their own poison. The moment they disappeared into the elevator, I went straight to find the waitress who had saved my life. She was near the kitchen entrance, clearing tables with practiced efficiency. When she saw me walking toward her, she immediately set down her tray and gave me her full attention. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion I was barely holding together. "I've been watching her for 2 days," she said quietly, glancing around to be sure no one was listening. "She's been putting something in your drinks every time you leave the table. I work in hospitality, know the signs of someone being drugged. The confusion, the disorientation, the way you seem fine one moment and completely lost the next." My legs nearly gave out beneath me. Hearing my suspicions confirmed was both validating and utterly terrifying. "Will you help me prove it?" I asked. She nodded without hesitation. "The ship's security office has cameras everywhere. We can check footage from tonight and probably from the past few days too." As we walked toward the ship's administrative offices, my mind raced with questions and horrifying possibilities. If Ava had been drugging me, what was her endgame? What was she hoping to gain by making me appear mentally incompetent? And, worst of all, was my son involved? The thought made me physically nauseous, but I needed the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Watching the security footage was like viewing a horror movie, where I was the victim and I didn't even know it. The ship's security chief, a serious man in his 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, pulled up the recordings on a wall of monitors in his office. The footage was crystal clear, captured from multiple angles, complete with precise timestamps, evidence that would be undeniable in court. There, the waitress said, pointing at the screen, right there. We watched as Ava excused herself from the table, claiming she needed to powder her nose. Instead of heading toward the restroom, the camera followed her to the bar. She ordered 2 glasses of wine, the same vintage we'd been drinking all week, and waited as the bartender poured them carefully. When the bartender turned away to serve another guest, Ava glanced around quickly to be sure no one was watching. Then she reached into her small evening purse and pulled out what looked like a tiny glass vial. "Can you zoom in on that?" the security chief asked. The technician enlarged the image. We watched her fingers move with practiced ease as she unscrewed the miniature cap and tapped white powder into one of the glasses. She stirred it quickly with a cocktail straw, tucked the vial back into her purse, and walked away with both glasses, smiling brightly. "The one on the left was yours," the waitress said quietly. "She made sure to set it on your side of the table." My stomach twisted as I watched myself on the screen, completely unaware I was about to drink poison. I looked so trusting, so grateful for her apparent kindness in bringing me a fresh glass of wine. "How long has this been happening?" the security chief asked, his voice heavy with concern. "I think months," I said. The words felt unreal as they left my mouth. "I've been having episodes, confusion, memory loss, disorientation. I thought it was just age. Maybe early dementia. We'll need to document everything," he said firmly. "This is attempted poisoning, possibly attempted murder, depending on what substance she's been using. I'm contacting the authorities immediately." As we replayed the footage, a rage rose inside me, unlike anything I'd ever felt. This woman, someone I had come to love like the daughter I never had been slowly dismantling my mind for her own twisted reasons. But beneath the anger was something even worse. Double quotes. "I need to know if my son is involved," I said, the words bitter on my tongue. The security chief's expression softened, but his voice remained professional. "We'll investigate everyone who had access to you, ma'am. No exceptions. Right now, our priority is securing the suspect and preserving the evidence." He made several calls in quick succession to the ship's medical officer, to the captain, and to what sounded like law enforcement contacts at our next port of call. Within 30 minutes, a plan was in motion. "We're going to search their cabin," he said. "If she's been drugging you, there will be evidence," the security chief said. "More vials, possibly your medication bottles with substituted pills, maybe even documentation of her activities." The thought of Elliot's reaction terrified me almost as much as the discovery itself. How do you tell your son that his fiancée is a would-be murderer? How do you look him in the eye and explain that the woman he loves has been slowly poisoning his mother? But I had to know the truth, even if it destroyed our relationship forever. At 11 o'clock that night, they knocked on Elliot's cabin door. I stood in the hallway just behind the security team, watching my son's face shift from confusion to horror as they explained why they were there. He was wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt, his hair messy from sleep, and he looked so young and vulnerable that my heart ached for him. Mommy stared at me desperately, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. "What's going on? What are they talking about?" I couldn't speak. I just stood there, staring at him, searching his face, trying to decide whether the son I had raised was capable of plotting my destruction, or if he was as much a victim as I was. The answer would determine whether I still had any family left in the world. The search of their cabin was thorough, methodical, and absolutely devastating. Ava was still groggy from the drug she had accidentally consumed. She lay on the bed in a silk nightgown, mumbling incoherently, while Elliot sat beside her, holding her hand and repeatedly asking what was happening. She was alert enough to understand that security officers were going through their belongings, but too disoriented to mount any kind of coherent defense. "This is insane," Elliot kept saying, his voice growing higher and more strained each time. "There has to be some kind of mistake. Ava would never hurt anyone, especially not my mother." But the evidence spoke louder than his protests. In her suitcase, hidden inside a zippered compartment beneath carefully folded lingerie, they found 3 small glass vials of clear liquid, each no bigger than a perfume sample. The labels had been removed, but you could see the residue where pharmaceutical stickers had been peeled away. "What are these?" the security chief asked, holding the vials up with latex-gloved hands. Ava tried to focus on them, blinking slowly, as though she were struggling to process what she was seeing. I don't know what those are. Then why were they hidden in your luggage? She couldn't answer or wouldn't. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish, gasping for air. But no words came out. They also found a prescription bottle that looked exactly like my blood pressure medication. Same pharmacy label, same drug name, same dosage instructions. But when they opened it, the pills inside were not the ones I had been taking for years. She's been switching your real medication with these, the security chief explained, holding up the counterfeit pills. We'll need to have them analyzed by a lab, but I suspect they were designed to cause the cognitive symptoms you've been experiencing. Elliot stared at the evidence in stunned silence, his face cycling through disbelief, confusion, and dawning horror. Ava, he said finally, what is this? What have you done? She looked at him with unfocused eyes, her beautiful face slack and vulnerable in a way that might have been heartbreaking if I didn't already know what she was capable of. It's not what it looks like, she slurred, her words thick and imprecise. Then what is it? He demanded, his voice cracking. She couldn't answer because there was no innocent explanation for vials of unknown drugs and counterfeit medications hidden in her luggage. But the most damning evidence was still to come. They found her tablet. When security accessed the photo gallery, dozens of video files appeared, videos I had never known existed, videos of me during my confused episodes, clearly recorded without my knowledge or consent. The security chief played them on the small screen, as we all watched in horrified silence. There I was, stumbling through my own kitchen, lost and disoriented. There I was, forgetting words mid-sentence during what looked like a phone call. There I was, appearing intoxicated and confused during what I now recognized as one of our shopping trips. Evidence, the security chief said quietly. She was building a case to prove you were mentally incompetent. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Ava hadn't been drugging me randomly. This wasn't reckless or impulsive. It was calculated. She had been systematically creating a documented pattern of cognitive decline, preparing to have me declared legally incompetent, so she could what? Take control of my finances, have me committed to a care facility. The ship's medical officer examined the prescription bottles I had brought from home. Sure enough, my medications had been tampered with. Pills that should have been controlling my blood pressure had been replaced with substances designed to cause confusion, disorientation, and memory loss. How long has this been going on? The medical officer asked. Months, I said, my voice hollow with shock. Maybe since we first met, as they prepared to transfer Ava to the ship's holding facility until we reached port. I finally asked Elliot the question that had been eating at me since this nightmare began. Did you know? He looked at me with tears streaming down his face, completely broken. Mom, I swear to you, on Dad's grave I had no idea. I thought, God help me, I thought you were just getting older. I thought the confusion was natural. I was actually grateful that Ava seemed to be taking such good care of you. I wanted to believe him. Every instinct I had as a mother wanted to trust that my son was innocent, that he had been manipulated just as cruelly as I had. But trust, once shattered, is harder to rebuild than love. The way you've been acting, I said carefully. The arguments I overheard, the distance, the stress. I've been worried about you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And Ava kept suggesting that maybe you needed a professional evaluation, that maybe you weren't safe living alone anymore. I thought she was being caring, responsible. I thought she was looking out for your best interests. The manipulation had been perfect. I realized she had made him complicit without his knowledge, turning his genuine concern for my well-being into a weapon against me. Still, I wasn't entirely convinced he was as innocent as he claimed. The next morning, we docked in Miami. Real police officers boarded the ship with the kind of calm efficiency that told me they'd handled shipboard crimes before. Ava was taken into custody, alert enough by then to understand that the life she'd known was over. Detective Maria Santos, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with graying hair and a nonsense attitude. Me in the ship's conference room while technicians photographed evidence and took statements from witnesses. We ran Ms. Mitch's fingerprints through our database. As soon as ship security contacted us, she said, flipping through a thick file folder, what we found is disturbing. She spread photographs across the table, mugshots, driver's license photos, surveillance images. Ava Mitchell isn't her real name. She's actually Ava Richardson, and she has a criminal record going back 7 years. Fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, She's made a career out of targeting wealthy older people. My stomach dropped. There have been others, Detective Santos continued, at least 3 that we know of. Most recently, she was married to a man named Robert Hossack, 60 years old, a successful contractor from Tampa. He died 8 months ago under what his family considered suspicious circumstances, an apparent heart attack during what appeared to be a bout of food poisoning. Elliot went pale. She told me she'd never been married before. She inherited a significant portion of his estate, the detective said, about $400,000, plus his house. His children contested the will, claiming their father had been acting strangely in the months before his death, showing signs of cognitive decline that didn't match his medical history. The pattern was becoming horrifyingly clear. There's more, Detective Santos said. She had a wealthy uncle, Edward Richardson, who was committed to a psychiatric facility 3 years ago after suddenly exhibiting signs of dementia and severe confusion. Ava was his primary caregiver before the commitment, and she now has full power of attorney over his finances. I felt sick. Is he still alive? Very much so, and according to his doctors, his dementia has improved dramatically since he was moved to a different facility and his medications were changed. They're now questioning his original diagnosis. So she's done this before, I said, though it wasn't really a question. We believe she's been perfecting this technique for years. Detective Santos replied, she targets wealthy individuals, usually older people with adult children who live far away. She gains their trust, slowly poisons them to create symptoms of cognitive decline, then either inherits their assets when they die or gains control of their finances when they're declared incompetent. Elliot's hands clenched into fists on the table, his whole body shaking. If she could do this to you, what was she planning to do to me? Detective Santos gave him a sympathetic look. Based on her established pattern, I'd say you would have been next after your mother was successfully committed or eliminated. A tragic accident, perhaps. Carbon monoxide poisoning, an allergic reaction to medication, a car crash, something that would leave her as your widow and the sole heir to both your assets and your mother's estate. The scope of her plan was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. She would have destroyed my mind, stolen my life, murdered my son, and walked away with everything we had worked for, only to start the process again with the next wealthy family. We're reopening the investigation into Robert Hughes's death, Detective Santos said, and we'll be reviewing Edward Richardson's case as well. If you hadn't switched those glasses, Mrs. Bennett, you might have saved not only your own life, but prevented future murders. What happens now? I asked. Ava Richardson will be charged with attempted murder, fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. Given the evidence and her criminal history, she's facing 25 years to life in prison. Her uncle will be moved to appropriate care. His finances will be investigated, and you'll need extensive medical evaluations to determine what substances she was giving you and what the long-term effects may be. As they led her off the ship in handcuffs, Ava looked back at me one last time. Her beautiful face was composed now, no longer confused or disoriented, and I finally saw her clearly for what she truly was, a predator who had chosen the wrong prey. I really did care about you, Rose, she called out, her voice carrying the same gentle tone she'd used when bringing me soup and sympathy. You have to believe that. But I didn't believe it, because someone who cares about you doesn't systematically destroy your mind for profit. Someone who cares about you doesn't turn your own son into an unwitting accomplice in your destruction. Someone who cares about you doesn't plan your murder while holding your hand and calling you family. The medical tests at the hospital in Miami were extensive and horrifying. The substance Ava had been giving me was a sophisticated cocktail of drugs designed to cause cognitive impairment, confusion, and memory loss without appearing in standard blood tests. It required pharmaceutical knowledge and precise dosing. Too little, and the effects would barely register. Too much, and the victim might die before the plan could be completed. You're extremely lucky you caught this when you did, Dr. Patricia Williams, the toxicologist, explained as she reviewed my results. This particular combination can cause permanent brain damage with long-term exposure. A few more months of systematic poisoning, and the cognitive damage could have been irreversible. The drugs were cumulative, slowly building up in my system, which explained why my symptoms had grown progressively worse. Each dose added to the last, creating increasing impairment that would eventually have left me completely dependent on a caregiver. Ava. Elliot stayed with me throughout the entire ordeal. He held my hand during procedures, brought me books and magazines, and listened when I needed to talk through everything that had happened. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in a single week, his face drawn with guilt and exhaustion. "I keep thinking about all the signs I missed," he said one afternoon as we sat in my hospital room, watching the Miami skyline through the window. "The way she always wanted to know about your finances, how she insisted on coming to your doctor's appointments, how she seemed to know more about your medical history than I did." "You couldn't have known," I told him, though part of me was still working through my own feelings about his role in everything. "She was good at what she did, professional. But I should have seen it," he said, his voice breaking. "I should have protected you. She even suggested we get you evaluated for dementia last month, said it would be better to catch it early, get you the help you needed. I thought she was being caring, responsible." The police investigation later revealed the full scope of Ava's crimes and the meticulous planning behind targeting our family. She had researched us for months before the accidental meeting she'd orchestrated with Elliot. She knew about my wealth, my isolation after Richard's death, and my longing to be closer to my son. She studied my routines, learned my vulnerabilities, and created a persona designed to give me exactly what I needed: a loving daughter figure who could bridge the gap between Elliot and me. "The plan was to have you declared legally incompetent and committed to a care facility," Detective Santos explained during a follow-up visit. "She would have moved into your house as Elliot's wife, slowly isolated him from friends and colleagues, and then something would have happened to him, too. A car accident, a sudden illness, something that would leave her the sole beneficiary of both estates. It was a year-long plan to systematically destroy my family and steal everything we had worked for. But she had underestimated one crucial factor: a caring waitress with sharp instincts and the courage to intervene." Ava Richardson was sentenced to 25 years in prison for attempted murder, fraud, elder abuse, and a dozen other charges. Her uncle Edward was moved to a reputable care facility and began slowly recovering with proper medication and supervision. The investigation into her previous husband's death was reopened, and authorities were confident they would soon have enough evidence to file additional charges. Elliot moved back home during my recovery and simply never left. He set up a home office in Richard's old study, cut back his work hours dramatically, and we started having dinner together every night, just like we used to when he was a child. "I almost lost you," he told me one evening as we sat on the back patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "I'm not taking that risk again. Business will survive without me micromanaging every detail, but I can't survive losing you." Our relationship had never been closer. The trauma had stripped away years of polite distance and forced us to confront how much we truly meant to each other. We talked about Richard, about missed opportunities, about the future we wanted to build together. Within a few months, I was back to my old self, sharp, independent, and maybe a little more cautious about who I trusted. But I wasn't bitter or paranoid. Life's too precious to waste on negative emotions, and I had learned that I was stronger and more resilient than I'd ever imagined. Every morning, I woke up in my beautiful house and felt genuinely grateful, not just for the luxury and comfort, but for the clarity of mind to appreciate them, for my son's presence and love, and for the second chance I'd almost lost to a predator's greed. The woman who had tried to steal my life had ended up giving me something precious instead: the knowledge that I could survive anything, and that sometimes the people trying to destroy you end up destroying themselves. Ava had wanted to live in my house forever, surrounded by all the beautiful things Richard and I had collected over the years. Now she has a permanent address, Tujas, not the one she had planned. Her new home has bars on the windows, locks on the doors, and she'll be there for the next quarter century. Thinking about how a simple switched glass changed everything. What did you think of this story? Have you ever had someone in your life who seemed too good to be true, who paid just a little too much attention to your personal business? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear about your experiences with people who weren't quite what they seemed. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.